It's a lot of new updated stuff on my phone. Hi guys, this is Connie, back for some more Connie Reads White Fragility. I'm fighting off a cold. It's not COVID. I've been tested. All is well. And I still have a voice, so we're going to use it. We are still on chapter 2. I think it's now officially section F of Racism and White Supremacy. This subsection's called The White Racial Frame. Here we go. Sociologist Joe Fegan coined the term, quote, white racial frame, unquote, to describe how whites circulate and reinforce racial messages that position whites as superior. In this way, the white racial frame rests on and is a key mechanism of white supremacy. The frame is deep and extensive with thousands of stored bits. These bits are pieces of cultural information, images, stories, interpretations, omissions, silences that are passed along from one person and group to the next, and from one generation to the next. The bits circulate both explicitly and implicitly, for example, through movies, television, news, and other media and stories told to us by family and friends. By constantly using the white racial frame to interpret social relations and integrating new bits, whites reinscribe the frame ever deeper. At the most general level, the racial frame views whites as superior in culture and achievement and views people of color as generally of less social, economic, and political consequence. People of color are seen as inferior to whites in the making and keeping of the nation. At the next level of framing, because social institutions, parentheses it says, education, medicine, law, government, finance, and the military. Because social institutions are controlled by whites, white dominance is unremarkable and taken for granted. That whites are disproportionately enriched and privileged via these institutions is also taken for granted. We are entitled to more privileges and resources because we are better people. At the deepest level of the white frame, negative stereotypes and images of racial others as inferior are reinforced and accepted. At this level, corresponding emotions such as fear, contempt, and resentment are also stored. The frame includes both negative understandings of people of color and positive understandings of whites and white institutions. It is so internalized, so submerged, that it is never consciously considered or challenged by most whites. To get a sense of the white racial frame below the surface of your conscious awareness, think back to the earliest time that you were aware that people from racial groups other than your own existed. People of color recall a sense of always having been aware, while most white people recall being aware by at least age 5. If you lived in a primarily white environment and are having trouble remembering, think about Disney movies, music videos, sports heroes, Chinese food, Aunt Jemima syrup, Uncle Ben's rice, the Taco Bell Chihuahua, Columbus Day, Apu from The Simpsons, and the donkey from Shrek. Reflect on these representations and ask yourself, did your parents tell you that race didn't matter and that everyone was equal? Did they have many friends of color? If people of color did not live in your neighborhood, why didn't they? Where did they live? What images, sounds, and smells did you associate with these other neighborhoods? What kind of activities did you think went on there? Were you encouraged to visit these neighborhoods, or were you discouraged from visiting these neighborhoods? What about schools? What made a school good? Who went to good schools? Who went to bad schools? If the schools in your area were racially segregated, as most schools in the United States are, why didn't you attend school there? Or why didn't you attend school together? If this is because you lived in different neighborhoods, why did you live in different neighborhoods? Were their schools considered equal to, better than, or worse than yours? If there was busing in your town, in which direction did it go? Who was bused into whose schools? Why did the busing go in one direction and not the other? If you went to school together, did you all sit together in the cafeteria? If not, why not? Were the honors or advanced placement classes and the lower track classes equally racially integrated? If not, why not? Now think about your teachers. When was the first time you had a teacher of the same race as yours? Did you often have teachers of the same race as your own? Most white people, in reflecting on these questions, realize that they almost always had white teachers. Many did not have a teacher of color until college. Conversely, most people of color have rarely, if ever, had a teacher who reflected their own races. Why is it important to reflect on our teachers in our effort to uncover our racial socialization and the messages we receive from schools? As you answer these questions, also consider which races were geographically closer to you than others. If your school was perceived as racially diverse, which races were more represented, and how did the racial distribution affect the sense of value associated with the school? For example, if white and Asian heritage students were the primary racial groups in your school was likely to be seen as better than a school with more representation from Black and Latinx students. Latinx throws me off sometimes because I'm never sure if I'm getting it right. What were you learning about the racial hierarchy and your place in it from geography? If you lived and went to school in racial segregation, as most people in the United States do, you had to make sense of the incongruity between the claim that everyone was equal and the lived reality of segregation. If you lived in an integrated neighborhood and/or attended an integrated school, you had to make sense of the segregation in most of society outside the school, especially in segments considered of higher value or quality. It is also highly likely that there is still racial separation within the school. And for those of us who may have grown up in more integrated environments due to social class or changing neighborhood demographics, it is unlikely that integration has been sustained in our current lives. Reflection on these questions provides an entry point into the deeper messages that we all absorb and that shape our behavior and responses below the conscious level. In the U.S., race is encoded in geography. I can name every neighborhood in my city and its racial makeup. I can also tell you if a neighborhood is coming up or down in terms of home equity. And this will be based primarily on how its racial demographics are changing. Going up, it will be getting whiter. Going down, it will be getting less white. When I was a child, posters on my school walls and television shows like Sesame Street told me explicitly that all people were equal, but we simply do not live together across race. I had to make sense of this separation. If we were equal, why did we live separately? It must be normal and natural to live apart. And certainly no adult in my life was complaining about the separation. And at a deeper level, it must be righteous that we live apart, since we are better people. How did I get the message that we were better people? Consider how we talk about white neighborhoods: good, safe, sheltered, clean, desirable. By definition, other spaces, not white, are bad, dangerous, crime-ridden, and to be avoided. These neighborhoods are not positioned as sheltered and innocent. In these ways, the white racial frame is under construction. Predominantly white neighborhoods are not outside of race. They are teeming with race. Every moment we spend in those environments reinforces powerful aspects of the white racial frame, including a limited worldview, a reliance on deeply problematic depictions of people of color, comfort in segregation with no sense that there might be value in knowing people of color, and internalized superiority. In turn, our capacity to engage constructively across racial lines becomes profoundly limited. To illustrate an early lesson in white racial framing, imagine that a white mother and her white child are in the grocery store. The child sees a black man and shouts out, "Mommy, that man's skin is black." Several people, including the black man, turn to look. How do you imagine the mother would respond? Most people would immediately put their finger to their mouth and say shush. When white people are asked what the mother might be feeling, most agree that she is likely to feel anxiety, tension, and embarrassment. Indeed, many of us have had similar experiences wherein the message was clear: we should not talk openly about race. When I use this example with my students, sometimes a student will say that the mother is just teaching the child to be polite. In other words, naming this man's race would be impolite. But why? What is shameful about being black? So shameful that we should pretend that we don't notice. The mother's reaction would probably be the same if the man had a visible disability or of some kind or was obese. But if the child had seen a white person and shouted, "Mommy, that man's skin is white," it is unlikely that the mother would feel some anxiety, tension, and embarrassment that would have accompanied the first statement. I disagree with that, but I think it's just the whole race conversation as a whole. It wouldn't matter whether they said black or white, but it definitely feels a lot more uncomfortable because they called out the white. Go figure. Now imagine that the child had shouted out how handsome the man was or how strong. These statements would probably be met with chuckles and smiles. The child would not likely be shushed because we consider these statements compliments. The example of a child publicly calling out a man's messed up that sentence. Let's try this last paragraph again. The example of a child publicly calling out a black man's race and embarrassing the mother illustrates several aspects of white children's racial socialization. First, children learn that it is taboo to openly talk about race. Second, they learn that people should pretend not to notice undesirable aspects that define some people as less valuable than others. In parentheses, it says a large birthmark on someone's face, a person using a wheelchair. These lessons manifest themselves later in life, when white adults drop their voices before naming the race of someone who isn't white, and especially so if the race being named is black, as if blackness were shameful or the word itself were impolite. If we add all the comments we make about people of color privately, when we are less careful, we may begin to recognize how white children are taught to navigate race. That is finally the end of chapter 2. So be careful with that and enjoy. Please and thank you, and I will see you for the next installment. Have a great one.